Hello, everyone, and welcome to Exercise is Bullshit. Obviously, bros using lessons learned and scientific heuristics to inform training, at least for this week, that's what it stands for. I'm so excited to be joined today by my good friend and fitness coach, Jack Oosten. Am I saying that right? I hope so. I've never actually asked how to pronounce your last name, Jack, so you can correct me.
Oosten is 1-0. Pretend it's 1-0.
Oosten. Okay, there you go. But Jack is the co-owner and head coach at Jackedn'Leen, not spelt the way you might think. His passion for coaching lies in bridging the gap between the science and practical application, which is a product of his lifelong interest in learning sports and training and nutrition. Jack believes every goal from high-level bodybuilding and athletic performance to improving baseline health and well-being requires a holistic and integrative 360-degree approach. He's worked with hundreds of clients and delivered 10,000 plus personal training sessions to a range of people from 6 to 80 with a variety of different goals and circumstances, all with the end objective of helping clients achieve life-changing results by unlocking their inner badassery. His specialties include internal health, restoration and optimization, injury rehab and prevention, bodybuilding, muscle growth, body composition, weight loss, fat loss, behavior change, integrative lifestyle coaching, and he's got a bunch of education credits. I'm not going to read all of them, but he's got a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, and probably most importantly, he's a certified exercise physiologist. You can touch on some of those other ones if you want to as well. But Jack, thank you for joining me today on the podcast, man. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate being an inaugural bro on this podcast.
Yeah, bros doing stuff.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if we want to get lost in that whole sub niche of podcasting, but here's we'll see what happens. So Jack's here today. He's a colleague. He's become a friend over the last year or so that I've known you, and I'm super excited to talk to you because you're actually working with my fiance right now, which we won't go too in detail to because I know she probably doesn't want us talking about her training program necessarily. But Jack and I became friends. I was following him for my master's program, learned a lot. He's one of the best technique coaches I've ever seen. And I don't know if I've ever told you this, but your coaching points are so otherworldly compared to, every time I hear you coach somebody, I'm like, God damn, I got to get better at actually figuring out ways to think of new and creative methods to tell people how to do things. So before we get started, Jack, I'd just love to hear sort of your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself, school and training, and then maybe how you got to Jackedn'Leen.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate, first off, that comment on the coaching. It's one of those things where I think with experience just comes a lot of different ways to not only your views on things, but how you can apply them to different people. And that's kind of where a lot of this started. Was inevitably I had a goal of looking a certain way. And I used to want to be a baseball player, got hurt back in college. I'm like, I need to find something that's going to satisfy like that physical component. And that was training. Right. And I was looking around for training information. And back then it was like still magazines and some forums and all those stuff back in the good old days. And just through application, trial and error over the years, I've found some things that started to work. And as the research has started to follow those things that we know in bodybuilding tend to kind of lead the way, now evidence is starting to back it up. We're starting to find some more of these like practical ways to apply these things. And as I've gained that experience, I've learned that everyone is N equals 1. So my take on training and all of my education is geared towards finding as much information as I can to solve as many problems as possible. That way there's never someone I come across that I can't help. Right. And ultimately Jackedn'Leen is an encompassing of all of those methods of coaching, everywhere from internal health restoration. We're looking at hormones, inflammatory pathways, how you eat, how you sleep, how you think. I do a lot of mindset work with people, physical training. So I believe that achieving results in the highest version of oneself comes down to, the 360-degree approach. And that's just something I've learned through the years.
Yeah. And I love that. And I can definitely second that, just seeing how you've interacted with my fiance, and the type of coaching has really been holistic. I think that's great that that's your guys' niche as well. And obviously it's you and your wife that have this company together. But I also think that N of 1 idea is so important, and knowing what your limits are, right? So just listening to you talk there's so many things that you do that I would never do with a client, just based on the business that I'm in and just based on my confidence level in talking to someone. And obviously you've had more experience in the nutrition realm, and you've had more experience, you've done some education. I think precision nutrition was maybe the coaching background there. So knowing what your limits are. I think this industry is just so unfortunately saturated with people that want to do everything. And again, I think you do a great job of really taking a holistic approach. But most of the time, you have to sort of be cautious of someone who says, "Oh yeah, we can do everything." It's like, well, are you going to do everything well, or are we just like? For me, it's just let's come in, let's focus on the resistance training piece, and I feel very confident in my ability to work with 99% of the population there. But if they're going for the other aspects, I'm going to send them somewhere else. And I think that's totally fine too, knowing your limits. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about your focus and who do you mostly work with? Now, obviously you have that 360 approach. Are you mostly working with bodybuilders? Do you have casual fitness people? Like, what does that audience look like for Jackedn'Leen?
So it's really evolved over the years. Obviously, most trainers getting into the industry, they train whoever they can get their hands on, right? Experience is power. And I ultimately love training absolutely everybody. And I always try to, I keep trying to identify who is the type of person I want to work with, because I've been told forever that that's so important. And I try to come up with these avatars and they have this much money, whatever. And it keeps coming back to a mindset. If you have the right mindset, and that mindset is that you are all into achieving whatever your goal is, then I'm going to be all in to help you. And when it comes to education, I totally agree with what you're saying before. I look at things outside the industry as much as I can to try to learn as many of these different viewpoints as possible. That way I get that person that comes to me, as long as they have that mindset, like I'm going to go find that resource that I need to, that may not be within the traditional fitness industry realm. So my target population is anyone who wants to get better, who wants to become a badass. Harder to kill is our terminology, H2K. So, a lot of times that's people who gear towards bodybuilding, but ultimately, Candace is not, maybe she will be a bodybuilder, maybe she won't be.
Yeah,
she's an awesome mindset. So
she's on the fence depending on the day, for sure. So talk to me a little bit about, because I'm hoping that we'll get some listeners who are maybe running their own businesses or working for someone else, and I think it's important to really focus on the entrepreneurial spirit you have as well, and look at the differences in offerings that you might have compared to some other people. Just spend a little bit of time talking to us about how you guys came to the sort of business model you did, and maybe what that looks like on a day-to-day interaction for you. Because I know that's something I think most trainers at one point or another have thought of, like, what would it look like if I went off on my own? And that's so fucking daunting, like, to think about, oh my God, how am I going to get people? What is it going to look like? What am I going to charge? And you don't have to get super in depth with like your pricing structure and all that, unless you want to. But I'd love to just hear, like, what does your model look like essentially?
Yeah. So we offer, from personal training to online coaching to consultations to hybrid, where we do some in-person sessions along with some online nutrition coaching check-in style. Ultimately, once again, everyone's N equals one, and everyone's going to respond to something a little bit different. Some people need a more hands-on approach. In that case, I definitely want to see in person. But if that person lives in Washington State, I can't see them in person, but I know I can still help them. And that's why I've evolved my offerings to include these different styles of coaching that can help, meet them where they're at. So when you start off as a trainer in the industry, obviously that one-on-one is crucial. You need to learn how to interact with people, talk to people, read and respond, all these things. As you learn more of that and you've gathered more of these avatars of people, I think that's when you can start to move into a little bit more of the online coaching realm, because ultimately online coaching is very daunting, or doing your own thing is very daunting. But I truly believe that if you've accumulated enough skill set, not just in terms of knowledge and application, but ability to talk to people and relate to people, you can be successful. And that's the big, alpha factor I think a lot of people lack. It's not the knowledge that's abundant these days. It's, can you connect with the person, meet them where they're at, and help show them the journey? If you can do that, I believe you can be successful on your own.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that just goes into sales 101 too. I was on Lawrence Neal's podcast not too long ago, and we were talking about this exact idea as far as, how do you close sales? What does it look like to be a successful salesperson? And it's really just empathy. It's listening to the person in front of you and trying to realize, like, what do they need? Right. And again, for me, it's something that I may not be able to offer them all the pieces of it, but to know, especially for you, that you've got the ability to create this program based on your experience around exactly what that person's looking for and customize it to them. I think that's so powerful in the online space for people. For those of you who don't know Jack, that could be the name of your podcast. You don't know Jack. So Jack has probably, and I don't want to upset my colleague Rick Rignell here, who I'm sure you know Rick too, who's got a very impressive home gym. Jack has the most fucking insane home gym I've ever seen in my entire life. It's a 3-car garage. That's even like an extended garage that you could like park an RV in that is filled with machines. And he's also got his basement filled with machines as well. I know you've talked about opening a gym. I'm not sure what that's looking like. Maybe just talk a little bit about, for some of our listeners who might be interested in acquiring some equipment, what has that journey been like for you? How much money have you spent on all this shit? What is your favorite pieces? Just talk to us a little bit about equipment, and then we'll kind of get into the topic for today.
Oh man, I love this little tangent. This is gonna be great. So, little teaser. I'm actually writing an ebook on like how to identify which machines might be better than others and different types of resistance, their applications and training. Yeah, it's something I think I'm uniquely qualified to speak on. But when it comes to acquiring exercise equipment, that's just, a lot of guys work on cars or collect sports memorabilia. I collect equipment. And so
I just realized we should probably do this as a separate podcast at some point too, because I feel like you and I could talk about this for hours. Yeah, I'm gonna let you go on your tangent here.
You kind of understand the game here too, right? But it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears hunting stuff on Facebook Marketplace, sketchy back alley deals. No, I'm just joking. I don't do that anymore. But it's
not anymore.
Not anymore. A little tidbit. This will be something in a home gym guide I'm going to write in the future. You need to identify the types of pieces that you want in a home gym, for example. Want a squat rack and the basic bars and dumbbells. Great. But what about some of these other accessory motions like a lying leg curl, which is hard to hit with a free weight? Go find that piece. And the ebook I'm writing will help you identify which type of piece you should look for. But ultimately, then you scour Facebook Marketplace, government auctions, etc. You find that piece. And that's just what I've done for years now and spent more money than I'd care to admit on.
I think it's interesting though too, because I know, some collectors who, we both know Tom pretty well. And sometimes people get like sketched out, like, don't tell people how we're doing this, how we're finding it. And to me, that's like the exact opposite of what I want, because I want everybody to have stuff for their house. And I see gyms that are opening up, like the place we go to out here, the Refinery. Is obviously the guy started as a collector, right? He has this amazing collection of equipment and he decides to open a gym. I think there's so much cool stuff on the secondary market, and realizing how to identify it and how to purchase it. And then I just get excited about 10 years from now, 15 years from now, because there's so many cool brands, as you know, and I know, that are coming into the marketplace that unfortunately some of these gyms are going to close, right? Like Prime is making some really cool stuff. They're producing it faster, as fast as they can possibly do it. And they're still like 18-month lag time behind. There's Gym 80, there's Jim Lecco, there's all these cool brands that are coming to the States. And, like I said, unfortunately, some of the gyms that they're going to, not going to last forever. So there's going to be a really cool surplus, I think, in the next few years of really high quality, newer equipment where, as you and I know, like the piece I had at my last place in Minnesota is 40 years old. Like you weren't getting new stuff very often for a while. And thankfully the Nautilus stuff, some of the MedX stuff, some of these other pieces, Hammer Strength, they last fucking forever anyways. But it's cool, the thought that maybe I could get like a brand new, 5-year-old piece in a few years from now. So anything else from the collection perspective before we move on here?
No, other than the fact that sometimes you got to give a little bit to get a lot. There's some pieces I haven't wanted to sell, but I can
expand on that. Talk to us.
Yeah. So, sometimes you go get a collection of equipment or a piece that you really like, and ultimately your taste may change, or there's another piece that you want beyond that piece. So, I would love to have all the pieces, but I've had to sell a few in order to make a trade for something that I really needed or desired. And then ultimately I found that stuff comes back to me on the back end too. I think when people are looking for equipment, they think this is like the piece that they're going to hold on to forever. But the piece they may really want might involve utilizing what they currently have to expand upon to get that future piece. So it's just like this ever evolving thing. It's a dynamic being, your home gym. It never stops growing.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I put a note. I think we should come back and talk at the end about your gym plans, what that's looking like, what you guys are opening. But the first thing I really want to ask you before we hop into our topic, which is going to be really about the value of supervision and working with a coach, which I think you're uniquely qualified, obviously, to speak on, is I really want this podcast to be about targeting people who have a science mind, right? And what I mean by that is the open mentality to realize that we're going to be wrong about a lot of shit, right? And the things that we thought we knew 5 years ago, and we were talking about this a little bit before we hopped on, are going to be constantly evolving, just like our future home gyms, right? So if you still believe the exact same thing you believed 5 years ago, 3 years ago, even last year, across the board, you're probably doing something wrong, right? And you're being more dogmatic than you are science-based, and you're really just locked into a niche more than you are about expanding your understanding. So I'd love to start off about what is something that in the last few years you've taken a complete 180 turn on, based on the most recent research or your just personal experience working with clients.
I'm sure you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah, where essentially,
I'm always on the top of Mount Stupid. Yes.
Right. Right. So for those who don't know what it is, basically by learning a little bit, you immediately think you're an expert, and then you learn a little bit more and you drop into a pit of despair because you realize how much you don't know. Slowly you start to work yourself back out of that pit, but it takes a long time. For along that journey, you become a true expert. So it's essentially, a lot of times in this industry, I see you learn a little bit of something or a new study comes out and everyone jumps on it, especially the way social media allows for that immediate, I'm going to put my thoughts out on this thing. And then that can flip in an instant. So one thing I've changed my thought on that I gravitated towards very quickly was, for example, like over supplementation of stress mediated issues. So one thing I used to do is like, oh, hey, I got super into cortisol and adrenal function. And while I still think it's incredibly important, instead of throwing all this ashwagandha and L-theanine and all these, rhodiola, all these things at it, let's just work on some like thought patterns and behavior patterns. And the way that you go throughout your day, are you doing some physiological breathing, like these things to bring your state down? So that's just a small example of something that maybe wasn't even necessarily wrong, but something I just snapped to a little bit too early. And I've since kind of come back to, again, just the basics on.
Yeah. And I think we're all, potential victims of that, right? Especially with supplementation. It's so tempting, which is ironic because like when I think of the pharmaceutical industry, all these red flags pop up and I start to think like, I probably shouldn't trust those people. But then you hear some kind of study about, like you said, ashwagandha can lower cortisol or whatever it might be. It's like, oh, well, that's natural. We should take that. That's obviously going to work. But then you look at, just lifestyle practices, right? Like for the people that have the lowest, raised cortisol levels are probably people who are pretty fucking chill, right? So maybe we could just work on being chill. Yeah.
Right.
And there's a lot of things we can do, just from daily practice, meditation, breathing, like you said. I think that's a great one, and one that happens over and over again whenever you see something that pops up in the research, or like you said, on social media that pops up. It's like, oh, this is the supplement. This is the one. We found it. Resveratrol, whatever it is, some kind of injectable.
Yeah. Can I add a side on that real quick?
Yeah, please.
I think it's super important as a coach that when you find something like that, maybe it is that awesome and it's worth everyone taking or doing, something like vitamin D, right? That was a thing at one point. But it's important to actually have a measured test on it and then to assess the results of the implementation. And that's when the rubber really meets the road. And what a lot of coaches don't do, or especially social media influencers, they'll push these products or these methods on you, but they are not testing them or utilizing them with anybody. And so look at like the real coaches, people actually in the trenches. And I wish I posted more on social media, but I'm too busy actually working with people and trying and seeing if ashwagandha lowers cortisol, right? So something for those of you to think about, especially like aspiring coaches, is have something to test these theories and interventions on in a safe manner. And see if that
like you've mentioned a couple times too, that N of 1, right? Like if you're getting testing done on yourself, it's very easy to obviously see how that works for you and then continue to slowly apply that to your clients or other people that you may be working with on an individual and customized basis. So no, I think that's a great one. Okay, so let's talk about and dive into this idea of supervision, which I think is, for you and me, something that hits really close to home, because obviously we make our bread and butter supervising people, coaching people. But I think the term is so often misunderstood, and how it can be applied and what actually counts as supervision. And is it just you and your buddy going to the gym, or do you have to be clinically supervised in a one-on-one setting? What is the max ratio that you can have in order to make sure that you're actually seeing benefits? And there was a recent meta-analysis from Schoenfeld and some colleagues on the importance of supervision. I'm not sure if you saw it. It was all over his social. But I just love to hear why you find supervision and coaching to be important, like super high level. What has been your experience of the value of supervision? And you can even preach it, like give us your spiel on why having a coach and working with somebody is important. And then we can talk a little bit more about the practical application, what the science actually says, and like what we've seen from an anecdotal and personal experience perspective.
So, like many things in coaching, I believe this as well exists on a continuum. But one of the example I like to give to people when I first onboard them as a client is elite athletes have coaches. Usain Bolt had a coach to help him run the fastest 100-meter. So why shouldn't you have a coach? I have a coach. My coach uses a coach. So I think that's because we can't, as humans, be fully objective with ourselves, especially when we're trying to break habits that we have formed in the past. We need that objective eye, that second opinion, someone to call you out on your bullshit. I'm not going to repeat the acronym, but it's because
it's still up in the air. So.
It's still up in the air. But once again, as humans, we just can't be objective with ourselves. So I exist to help you find the gaps in what you're doing and help you move the needle towards success of your goals. So it exists on a continuum.
I think that's so important. And that to me is like humanity 101 that you just described. Some of our listeners might know that I'm in recovery, right? And I think one of the biggest foundations of recovery, whether it's AA or any other type of recovery program, is that you literally have blind spots, right? You can't see your bullshit, no acronym necessary this time, that's perpetuating in your life. And you need those other people around you, and you need a support system and a structure to say like, hey, Logan, you're being an asshole. Like, you're wrong in this situation, or hey, you're right, and this other person's unjustifiable in what they're doing. And to think that the same thing doesn't apply in our personal life and our eating decisions and our nutrition decisions and our you just look at all the nutrition research, and every single study is like, people are so bad at self-reporting. And the same thing happens in physical fitness studies as well. And it's like, we don't even know that we're doing it. And it's it's humanity in general. So I love that idea of, coach having a coach. And I always think of, the meme of like following the coach up the lineage, right, to find the ultimate coach at the top, like who's coaching the best coach. So you've worked as a trainer, as a fitness coach for a long time, one-on-one in small groups, and you still do some in-person coaching. I know this because you've destroyed me in person, but now you mostly focus on online and your guidance there. So what is your coaching take? Talk to us a little bit about that spectrum. What is the most important style of coaching? Is it just accountability? From a training perspective, do you think you need somebody there all the time, or is it just having a program that's based for you? Just talk to me a little bit about that.
This is where the N=1 continuum concept comes in for sure. I exist to, once again, like fill in the gaps. And at the same time, my job as a coach to always be thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead based on the goal you've told me you want to accomplish. So ultimately, if someone comes to me and they have chaos in their lives, I want to help you create a plan that gives you consistency in the chaos. One that you can ride with when the last thing you want to do is follow that plan. Even if that plan is the most simple plan ever, I believe just having a plan is step numero uno. From there, you can layer on more accountability based on what the person needs, daily conversations. I offer unlimited messaging with my service. Like, if you need something, let me know. But my job, once again, as a coach, is to think about, especially the places you haven't been. I always tell people, this is the first time you've been on this part of this journey. This is not the first time I've worked with someone getting through this part of the journey. And my coaching's like an onion. I'll just keep peeling back layers as we need to get a little bit deeper for you. But I'll just keep giving you, meeting you where you're at. So if you need in-person training, like, hey, let's find a way to make that happen. If it's just a plan that works, awesome.
And how do you sort of differentiate? Because again, I think we'll have people who are listening here who are maybe new or branching out for the first time and want to be able to offer some of this more holistic approach to their clients. What are some of the strategies you use? And obviously it comes down to conversation and things like that, but big picture, what are some of the ways you find out what's important to people, what their values are around training, and how do you start to peel those layers of the onion to really dig a little deeper?
So the first thing I always start off with is Tell me about the ideal version of yourself. What does that person walk like, talk like, look like, act like? How do they think? Everything that that person is and will be, that version of yourself that you want to accomplish. Now let's do the same identification process, but for how you are right now. And so what we need to do is find now that gap and reverse engineer the process utilizing 4 major prongs, in my opinion. There's sleep, stress management / mindset intervention, nutrition, and physical well-being. So basically the big rocks. How do we, reverse engineer a plan utilizing those 4 rocks to start moving you towards that process, that end state version of yourself, right? So where do you want to be? Where are you now? Let's reverse engineer a game plan. Now with my knowledge, my more in-depth knowledge, you want to run or you want to lift 500 pounds, you're only lifting 100 pounds right now. I know I'm not going to get you to 500 right away. So what's the next smallest thing I can move? That's the biggest linchpin in that process. Where is your biggest sticking point or the blind spot that we need to tackle? Let's tackle that. As that improves, maybe we layer in another thing. Everyone's gonna be able to handle a different amount of intervention based on a lot of factors.
And how are you tracking these things for people so that they continue to see? Because obviously we know about the principle of progressive overload, but are you, and I know the answer to some of these questions, but I think it's interesting to our listeners. How are you gauging this for people? Are you using an app? Are they tracking their workouts? Are they writing it down on a piece of paper? And how are you continuing to follow up with them? And what does that cadence look like for your check-ins for those people?
Yeah. So we have a Jackedn'Leen Coaching app, which is where I deliver the entire program, training, nutrition, cardio plans, supplement plans. As we do our communication, everything we need is in there. My goal as a coach is to give you a plan that you know exactly what to do every single week and every day of that week. I want as little question marks in your head as possible, because ultimately I see those question marks as friction, and that's chances where you deviate. So as far as the check-in process, I typically do once a week, like a big check-in, but I do have my clients record daily a number of variables that are consistent with what they need to accomplish. So if we're trying to work on someone's energy levels, obviously I want to know how energy is every day. I want to know how, give me some information on that, if it's higher or lower, and that way I can evolve your plan. So we'll have those touch points at least once a week. If they have questions in the meantime, I'm there for support. And I think that's, as a coach, your job is to find that frequency of communication.
And you can evolve those questions based on the person in front of you and what they're actually looking for. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean the app is great. I know it's white labeled and it's really cool. So for any coaches that are looking to have their own app, definitely reach out to Jack. And I'm sure he could talk to you about how to set up and structure that too, or just check out the Jackedn'Leen app and pay Jack to do it for you. So talk to me a little bit about training specifically. Now you mentioned a little bit that you tend to work with some bodybuilders. How do you think about programming and putting together a program for someone based on their goals? And what is your frequency and your intensity? Like, how are you structuring and where do you sort of fit in the resistance training umbrella? I know we both have sort of a high intensity training background, but you've definitely sort of taken your own road with that, and as you've evolved and learned more stuff. So talk to me about how you maybe put together a program for someone and what that initial frequency and intensity might look like for that person. Obviously speaking very generally, because you're going to get so many different people along the spectrum.
Yeah. First off, I love nuances. So if anyone ever has questions on nuance, please ask.
Another whole podcast.
Another whole podcast, man. Each of these should be a podcast themselves. But when it comes to the training specific thing, I think a lot of people in essence should train like bodybuilders. Personally, that frequency of numbers per times per week can vary from anywhere from 3 to 5.
Spoken like a true bro.
Like all a true bro, right? Yeah, living up to the name here. When you asked me what my last name was earlier, I always say, if you can't spell my last name or say it, just call me bro. I respond very well to that. But when it comes to training, I think if people train like a bodybuilder, let's think about the way bodybuilders train. Usually in like somewhere between that 6 to 12, maybe 15 rep range, which is not enough load that's going to ever really hurt you. And you're not doing 20, 30 reps, which can get extremely boring. Usually a good diversity of exercises, training close to fail. We know that typically the harder you train, the better results you're at least guaranteed to get. And if you can start with that type of a base and then just reverse engineer based on how much someone can handle volume and frequency wise that fits in their schedule, I think you can come up with a pretty well customized plan for pretty much everybody, unless they're like an elite athlete or power lifter, or there's a massive rehab consideration.
So I'd love to talk to you because I think this is maybe where we veer off a little bit from each other, not too much, but from a volume perspective, because I hear bodybuilding and I agree with you. I think the structure in general, if you're looking at the people who are getting the best results, it's not always the best idea to look at the people who are the most genetically inclined, right? But I think in general, bodybuilders have a pretty good idea of like, we need to work on the holistic package, right? I think of bodybuilders, I think of Arnold right away. And I think of 6 to 10 sets of everything, those ridiculous workouts. Like I used to read the magazines as well, where it's like you actually read this workout. It's like, this would literally take 3 fucking hours to do this workout. And you want me to do this 6 days a week? Like, where can you find the time, first off, if that's not your only time commitment? So what is your actual, I think it would be worth talking a little bit about this. What are you expecting from clients? And again, I know this varies, right? But are they looking at a 30-minute workout? Are they looking at a 2-hour workout, 3 days a week, 5 days a week? What does that structure kind of look like?
I think, and that's not even so much the person dependent. It absolutely is, but a lot of times it's how intense they want the results to be. If we're looking at you want to become a significantly more muscular person, there are things that we need to do. And typically that means a little bit more volume. Now, I am not a high volume, super high volume advocate, but somewhere in that, 8 to 12 sets per body part, if I'm working in more of a specialization, like some muscle group I'm trying to grow, I do believe we got to find a way to get those in. Now, if that means we pull back somewhere else, great. And ultimately, if you are super short on time, let's find a way to get that in. And if it's a recovery issue, what else are we not doing on the back end, sleep, food, stress-wise, that could be allowing for that recovery ability to be improved? So, I definitely don't want to say like it only takes 2 sets per body part per week, or that you have to do 12 on every body part, but you do need to scale it based on the intensity of results that you want. If you want to maintain, we know you need a lot less than if you want to actively grow. And that's why I coach my people on phases of their training. This is a period right now where we're definitely going to push up this body part you told me you wanted to improve, knowing that in a few months around the holidays when you're more busy, we'll scale that back to maintenance because at least we can hold your tissue, whatever that may be.
Yeah, and I think that's so unnecessarily provocative in the industry that I'm in to say that more volume is necessary. And I can obviously speak to what your program looks like because I've been training my fiance doing it. And I think the longest workout we've done has been like 45 minutes, and that's felt like forever for me. Especially keep adding in a couple sets. Maybe it's been like 50 minutes, but still, by comparison, I wanted to hear you describe that and then just still put it in context for what you might be thinking of if we're talking about like C-Bump, right? Like Mr. Olympia, probably training 6 days a week, 3 hours at a time. Like, we're still talking about a fraction of the time commitment in general for most people. And if you're training smart and consistently, you don't have to spend hours and hours in the gym, even if you're doing that 8 to 12 sets per week per body part. And it's hard to argue with. I mean, we've seen multiple meta-analyses that look at hypertrophy, at least in the short term, right? If your goal is to grow muscle in 8 to 12 weeks, you can't really argue with the vast amount of research that points that you should be doing somewhere in that 8 to 20 sets per muscle group. Now, long term, that's where you could have the conversation. That's where the nuance comes in. If your goal is not to be Mr. Olympia and you just want to continue to see muscle growth and development over time, yeah, 2 sets a week is probably fine per muscle group, right? Especially if you're going to get some crisscross, and especially if you've never done anything, which I think is an important point to talk about too, right? If you've never strength trained before at all, and we put you on a twice a week 30-minute full body program, I've seen people grow drastic amounts of muscle fast when they've never done anything. Now, could they have grown more? Potentially. Do they care? Probably not, right? But the people who are looking to compete definitely care, and that's when that range in that spectrum comes in. Do you have people on both ends of that spectrum when you're talking about that N of 1, or do you typically try to push them towards, again, I hate to say this is a higher volume approach, but higher volume than like a traditional classic HIIT approach? Is that something you're sort of taking with everybody that you work with?
I would say yes. Although I train quite a wide variety of people. If I'm, I work with a client, for example, right now, she's in her 70s. We're working on restoring a gut issue that she has. She basically had really low stomach acid and yada, yada, yada. In order to do that, I can't put too much stress on her body through training while we recover these other systems. In this case, she's at 3 days a week. We're doing just 4-ish exercises per workout, like 3-ish sets per exercise. So those workouts are closer to like 30 to 45 minutes. So I definitely don't push everyone there. It's incredibly context dependent. However, I will say this is a huge tenet I've actually become more in belief with over time, is that you're kind of in with your goals or you're out. Or at least if you actively want to accomplish something, you need to be in versus out. I'm not saying you need to always be in, always be gung-ho. I have 2 kids. I've had periods where I've been way up and down. But if you tell me that, hey, Jack, I want to do this, I'm going to write the plan to accomplish that based on the parameters that you give me. And typically it is a little bit on that higher spectrum skew, just especially because a lot of people just want to grow muscle mass and lose some body fat. So we're looking at, 45 minutes to an hour-long workouts typically. But you can get away with less depending on the goal.
Do you have people that maybe shift over the course of their training career with you that go, hey, I've got, an hour and a half to commit to these workouts multiple times a week, to a different season of life where, hey, I've got a little kid. I still want to work with you, Jack, but I can't commit more than an hour a week. Have you had those situations come up, and how have you shifted your programming in those instances?
That's a great question. And that's honestly my bread and butter, is that level of customization and shifting and taking people through a process. So many coaches will either they give cookie cutter plans, or they're only really with you when you are at your peak level of goal attainment, right? Like you don't have kids, you don't have a stressful job, whatever it is. I like to live in the shit with people. Like when your life gets really tough, you have that new kid, you get that new job, you have the breakup, whatever. I'm there to help you once again find that consistency and the chaos. So people absolutely evolve, and I as a coach evolve there with them. At the same time, my job is also to help you hold the vision for yourself that you told me you wanted. So if you're falling off due to something that's more subjective in nature, you're going through a bout of depression, obviously let's identify the root cause why. Versus if you're having an international move or something, I'm going to skew it a little bit differently. So people 100% evolve. I've taken a lot of people from just wanting to, hey, Jack, I just want to feel a little bit better, to I want to step on stage. That's one of my favorite transformations. I'm a specialist in getting people on stage for the first time. And hopefully Candace is one of those.
Yeah. And I think that's important to remember too, just as we're having these conversations, right? Like clients and people who train are also on a spectrum, right? And the people that Jack is seeing tend to be more inclined to want to have, whether they know it or not, I would say you probably tend to attract people who, at least subconsciously, like they're coming to you, they see your coaching marketing materials, they see that you brought other people to the stage, even if their immediate thought is not, I want to compete. Somewhere lingering in the back of their head is probably, maybe I could do that someday if I had the right person in the right situation. And I don't think everybody has to be like that. I think that's an important caveat, right? And I specialize, and my bread and butter is people who don't want to work out at all, right? who literally are sometimes even being forced into the studio by their grandkids or by their kids, and maybe they've had a fall. It's not all older individuals who don't want to work out. Obviously, we get some people who just maybe are time strapped and see the appeal of what we do twice a week for 30 minutes. But there's definitely a spectrum of what clients are looking for too. And I think being able to cater to all those things is certainly beneficial. Go ahead. You've probably seen some pretty cool transformations like I have, for people who never thought they could do it, or you do like, ooh, I don't know if they can do it, to being it's their thing, or they've seen killer results. And there's almost nothing more impactful as a coach when you see that person who was like lacking self-confidence, hated working out, love that stuff. Right. Become that person. And that's really what I'm about, is it's that harder to kill. I just want to make you a more badass version of yourself. And I think every single person has it in them to do that if they find the right driver, and they believe in their goal. And more importantly, they have that right coach, or we talk about like supervision, whatever that we want to call that, along the way. If they do that, I think anyone can attain a higher version of themselves. Yeah. And I think it's in my industry specifically, right? I'll talk about myself, just in some of our colleagues. I see this hesitation to want to push people to go beyond this certain range, right? Maybe it's 3 days a week. Maybe it's a 45-minute workout, but oh my God, your body's never going to recover and you're never going to be able to adapt if we do any more than that. And occasionally we'll get somebody who's fucking like a specimen, right? That comes into the studio doors, and it's like, I can lead you so far And we could potentially do a little bit more, but it just doesn't really fit into the concept of my business and what we're trying to do. And I think to have the ability to understand either I have to do this personally and take sort of a veer off of what I've been committed to, or to have somebody like you that I could refer to and say like, hey, I know a guy that specializes in this thing that you're trying to do. It's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. It goes back to like knowing what your lane is, right? And bodybuilding is not our specialty, right? Like we're not looking to get people stage ready. We have done it. Like, some clients that we've had that have gone on and had really successful bodybuilding showings, just training twice a week for 30 minutes. But they are definitely the exception to the rule, right? And probably have pretty good genetics, where they probably could have even had a better, more holistic approach for a bodybuilding specific goal, right? As opposed to just, I want to maximize health and longevity, which I think HIIT and the traditional twice a week for 30 minutes is great for. If you've got other goals outside of that, there's certainly other ways to achieve those goals. One of the things I'd love to pick your brain on a little bit too is, specifically with the supervision and the coaching, I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind as well, with volume especially, is sometimes I think more volume is maybe necessary when you're by yourself too. And what have your experiences been with that as a coach from afar, right? Because I think of, the workout we did together, right, at your house. We did a couple workouts there. I don't need 3 sets of any of those, right? Like if you're there and you're coaching me and you're motivating me, 1 set, I would argue, is fucking plenty on almost every one of those exercises. Like a warm-up set, make sure I'm feeling in the right muscles. 1 working set, man, it's hard to argue in my mind, at least subjectively, that you would need much more stimulation than that if your goal is not, Mr. Olympia. But when you're by yourself, talk to me a little bit about the thought process of how that might be beneficial. Somebody who's maybe never trained before, and why doing a few more working sets might actually be beneficial for that person.
This is a great question. I think let's start off with the importance of identifying the stimulus you're trying to achieve. You need to know what stimulus are you trying to achieve? Is that hypertrophy? Is it just strength? Is it some connective tissue stimulus? Whatever it may be, you need to identify the stimulus. From there, you need to, once again, reverse engineer now, how am I going to achieve that stimulus? You already have your frequency in the week, your number of sets. The last part is kind of that intensity during the set. And I think a lot of that intensity during the set is dictated based on how you prepare yourself for that set. That starts after the set from the previous week, how you were sleeping, how you were eating, your way you were thinking, all these things. And then you get to the workout itself, and now you're doing your warm-ups. And the amount of sets you will need depends on a lot of factors. But yeah, having someone there to push you harder, you're going to be able to get a lot deeper into that set. You may need less total sets if your goal is muscle growth because you're trying to achieve failure. Maybe if you're on your own, you need more sets because you don't have that someone there to push you. You could also maybe achieve a similar effect with getting up to that 1 or 2 top sets by having appropriate warm-up period where there's the blood flow, there's a neurological connection, all these other things leading up to it. So to say you only need 3 sets if you're on your own and you need 2 sets with somebody else, but your warm-ups are completely different, or the way your weeks were rolling were completely different, that's I don't think a very accurate thing to say. I think it's going to be entirely dependent on how you set yourself up for that stimulus that you are trying to achieve. And then how you are achieving that stimulus is also dictated on some factors within the set and the workout themselves. If I'm on my own, I don't have someone there to push me the same, I'm probably going to add another set or 2 because I don't have those couple reps past failure. Now, maybe it's not even super beneficial based on some of the literature to go super past failure anyway. Like, why do I need to completely bury myself just because I have someone there with me? Why can't I achieve a very similar endpoint of the set? I just have someone there to make sure, at that failure point, I'm not dying. Maybe I get 1 more rep, but I shouldn't probably get 5 more because that throws off my volume for the week. Whatever it is, if you have someone there, try to have someone there consistently. If you don't have someone there consistently, but know how you achieve that set stimulus, whether it be with somebody or without somebody. Does that make sense?
100%. I love this topic, and I love the nuance of it too, because that's something I feel really strongly about is, AOTs are great for those who don't know, advanced overload techniques. I almost find them more beneficial alone, right? When it's harder to push yourself because you don't have somebody there, where, like you said, I remember my first few workouts coming from a super slow facility when I started at the company I'm with now. and people would just try to fucking murder me and still
Yeah.
do at the end of a set. And it's like, well, I can do one of two things. I can either stop short and let you murder me, or I can kill myself and just have you be there and push myself for you further. But I can't do both, right? And there's this idea, and I think it's pretty dogmatic in our, I'll say my industry, right? Because you seem to be a little broader umbrella, but in the HIIT industry especially, is just like you have to have someone there. They have to push you. You have to do these advanced overload techniques. And I just don't see the need if you cue it up right, if you have an appropriate coach, if you can read and respond and you see that somebody's actually giving you an all-out effort. I'll think of an example here that our listeners won't know, but you probably will. Do you remember David Kramer?
Mm-hmm.
That guy would literally fucking destroy himself on leg extension. Like, it made me throw up, want to throw up watching him do leg extension. I didn't need to do anything at the end. Like, I'd just say, keep struggling, Dave, until you can't struggle anymore. And he would keep struggling until you finally were like, okay, stop. It's making me uncomfortable.
Right.
And if you have somebody like that, you don't need to do anything else at the end. Arguably, you might even need to hold them back a little, which is usually, it's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. So I think that's such an important point too, is do you utilize any AOTs with clients? Is that something you'll incorporate for them when they're on their own? Maybe, hey, add in a breakdown here if you feel like you didn't quite get there. Do you have those conversations with people?
That's a great question that I have changed my thought on over time. I used to do a lot of rest pauses, breakdowns, mechanical drop sets, all those things to try to, I thought I had to elicit the same level of intensity that I was when I was back in like more HIIT training facility. And what I found is that, like you said, people stop short of failure when they know they have something coming typically. I developed myself personally a little bit of like, PTSD, post-training stress disorder. Like I would train and I hated going, I didn't look forward to my workouts anymore. I hated the way I felt when I left. And to be honest, I don't think I wasn't growing the same because I was so focused on that end point after failure that was going to stop myself short of what was really the most beneficial part. So when I'm coaching people, especially these online programs I write for people, typically I completely leave out these AOTs, maybe a rest pause here and there, or like a weighted stretch or something here and there. But largely, let's identify the end point of the set that is going to be something you can maintain accurately over time. From there, if we aren't achieving the stimulus and we have something to give there, I'm going to try to push you to find that. If we find that we still have more we need for the stimulus, like you can just add another set. And that's kind of what we find in literature. Yeah, there's some research showing like supersets might be as beneficial as straight sets, but straight sets are at least always as good, if not better, than these advanced overload techniques. And if we're talking time consideration, I think that's another consideration. But and in a second, we could talk maybe some central and peripheral fatigue mechanisms too. But
yeah, I'd love to get into that. I think it's just the ambiguity in the literature is so hard. Like, this is where the research is great, but the application actually has to come into play, and how you're going to incorporate this with clients. And when you've only got 30 minutes twice a week, I think AOTs, especially in the beginning, are such a powerful tool to get people to understand what intensity is. Because as you know, as I know, when people first come in the door, and maybe you don't experience this as much anymore if you're getting a lot of people who have resistance training experience that are coming to you in the first place. But when you have somebody who comes in the door, has never lifted a weight in their entire life, they have no fucking idea what intensity is, right? And I still, I've changed my mind on a lot of things. I still think intensity is probably the main driver of stimulus. Intensity plus, volume and frequency can be interchangeable there. But if you're just doing garbage volume, I don't think you're going to see the same level of growth you would as if you're doing really intense sets. So how do you teach somebody what intense is? Well, you can't just tell them, just go till you don't want to go anymore, because we've seen time and time again that can be, people will underestimate their reps by 10, 20, sometimes 30 repetitions in studies of like where they think failure is or they can't continue versus what it actually is. So I think there's definitely a time and a place for those things, but I totally agree, especially if you're not working with somebody one-on-one. I definitely have PTSD too, but I also love working with somebody, and you're included on this list, obviously, that knows, hey, that was him giving it. He was really giving it there. And maybe I encouraged him a little. I got a little bit extra out of him. And obviously I want my quads to look fucking huge when I'm training at Jack's place, right? So I'm going to work a little harder, but at a certain point, we probably don't need to do the 10 additional assisted repetitions on, the strive leg extension at the end. So talk to me a little bit about the fatigue. Go into that.
Yeah. So, if you're hitting that failure point, why are you failing is a big question we need to ask, right? Are you failing mentally? Are you failing peripherally, we could say? So central nervous system fatigue or CNS fatigue is essentially the way your brain is saying signals contract is physically reducing the amount of motor recruitment that you have. And when we see that happen, typically during really, really high rep aerobic exercise type endurance, 30 plus rep type stuff, and a lot of eccentric overload, we can see the signals being sent reduced, which also creates a lot of muscle damage. But we won't talk about that right now. That would end a set in a different way than something that's more peripherally fatiguing, which is more how the muscle itself is contracting. And when we do that, the muscles are more likely to reach a higher level of motor unit recruitment, because basically the science principle states we'll just keep recruiting more fibers until everything's fatigued out. So as long as we're still getting the stimulus or the signal to contract it, we will keep contracting it, but at some point they'll just fatigue out. And that's more of that peripheral fatigue. On bigger exercises, we'll have more either CNS or just this technique oriented fatigue where you're not as proficient in the motion. And so you'll fail because you can't get quite as deep because you physically don't know how to contract things the same way. Or if you're more advanced, you can get more out of a compound exercise, but definitely more out of maybe like an isolation or single joint type exercise. So your level of recruitment at failure will be much tighter to what is actually going to achieve that stimulus than someone who's a newbie. But identifying is this more centrally fatigue driven or peripherally fatigue driven can help us kind of identify what we're getting as far as stimulus from that set. Does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah, no, 100%. And great points there, and how to think about your training and the fatigue and the stimulus response relationship there. I'd love to get specific as we maybe start to move towards wrapping up here. As far as what does a program look like for you? Maybe you can use yourself, because I believe you're getting ready to compete at some point. What is a split? What are you doing? What kind of time commitment does that look like? And maybe you're not the best example. I don't know, because you're also a freak and you like going to the gym all the time. So maybe you're not the best person. Maybe it should be somebody who's not as enthused, but still wants to compete. But what does that look like? Get specific for us about, your programming and what you could expect on a Sunday through Saturday basis. So you can really paint the picture for people for what we're talking about here from a programming perspective.
Before I dive into what my program looks like, I want to make it clear that I do not always love going to the gym. I'll actually be honest, and more often than not, especially for a very long time, it actually gave me quite a bit of anxiety, just because I would think about how much I need to crush myself. I'd overthink it because I'm a coach who knows a lot, or I just didn't feel like it because I've had 2 young kids in just a few years. I just didn't feel like it. However, and this has been a big change in myself and the way I coach people in the last year and a half or so, is I love the way I feel when I do certain things, and then when I do things like eat on my meal plan, sleep right, train how I need to train, the way I feel and the way I look drives just everything in my life super positively. So I train 5 days a week. Don't always love going to the gym, and I got a lot of stuff going on, so I'm not looking to spend 2 or 3 hours in the gym, but I do know what I need to achieve that end state of the way I want to feel, which is kind of that thing we talked about earlier with this end state version of myself. To get there, this is what I'm doing to get there. And that's 5 days a week, an hour. I usually spend about an hour and a half training because I like to just roll through my sessions. I don't like to, within a set, I take it hard, but then I take a lot of time to chill between sets, which I think is highly underrated. Try to bring my central nervous system down a little bit, recover, make sure mentally I'm ready to go for the next set, whatever it may be. So it extends my workout a little longer than it needs to be. But 5 days a week, about an hour and a half.
But I think there's plenty of research to show, especially now, we used to think that there was some hypertrophic benefit to those shorter rest periods, but a lot of what's coming out these days is showing that the longer intervals are actually super beneficial, which actually makes a lot more intuitive sense, right? From a fatigue perspective. I think it's an important caveat to note that Jack literally needs to walk 30 feet away from where he is right now to go to the gym too. So that probably plays a part, and I can, just take my sweet time and spend an hour and a half in there, where somebody who might not have, 70 machines in their house just behind them. you have to go, you have to change all those things. So that's definitely, I'm sure, part of it. But no, I think that's super, super beneficial. Are you splitting? Are you doing like a typical bro split, or do you have a different muscle group that you're targeting each day of the week? What does that look like?
So my needs analysis was basically that my back is a strong point, chest is a strong point, shoulders are pretty good, legs are okay, could use a little improvement, and arms.
Picking legs.
Right. Not fully, but just everything else grows way faster. Let's just say that. So I'm training arms. I've dedicated one full day to them. Some people respond better to multiple days. I have personally grown best from doing them once per week on a more dedicated day. And I'm doing a pull day and a push day and then 2 leg days. So 2 leg days I have found. Now, this is an important part about leg days is they just think they create a lot of fatigue themselves, right? And we know that from some literature. I still think 2 times a week for me and most people looking to grow their legs is ideal, because even though they create more fatigue, it's harder to actually achieve the stimulus you want, because mentally it's fucking hard to train legs. So I have found that, right? So when I get there, I'm pretty beat up, but I can't do more than like maybe 2, maximum 3 sets per exercise. Or if you stop a little bit short, you got to have another day because you didn't achieve the stimulus you needed. And then you could compound that across the week. So 2 leg days I find works well for me and a lot of other people.
Do you split up the leg days? Are you focusing on different areas within those leg days? Are you doing like a anterior and posterior chain, or how does that look for you typically?
I have both days I train pretty even volume of quads and hamstrings, but I on one day put my heavier hinge, which is an RDL, earlier in my workout when I'm a lot fresher, and then I'll have more stable, like a leg extension and leg press type quad motions where I'm not relying on my low back or anything else that could fatigue. Once again, that kind of central versus peripheral fatigue mechanisms. On my other day, I'll have primarily quad stuff at the start, and I'll finish off with a little bit easier on my like low back hinge, like a 45-degree hyper type motion. So I personally like hybrid leg days, and even if I'm right 3 days a leg, 3 leg days a week for a bikini competitor, I still usually involve a little bit of each muscle group on there, just to top off that stimulus, right? Like just get it a little hit.
Get the appropriate volume across the week. Makes sense.
Yep.
I think that point about legs too can't be overstated. I jokingly say this, but I think it's probably true. And I've said this to multiple clients and trainers and stuff before, is I don't know that I've ever actually failed on a leg press. Like I don't think, with all that I know, all the training that I've done, all the supervision that I've had, I don't think anybody's ever actually pushed me the way that like I hear about Casey Viator, right? Or, Mike Mentzer doing his leg stuff. Like I don't think for most people that's physically possible. And we drastically underestimate the strength and the endurance capacity of our legs, right? Like you can put a lot of weight on something and still get 30 fucking reps on a leg press. And it's like, when will this end? So, it's almost once you cross a certain threshold with legs, you just physically can't perform it anymore, right? It's not like the rest of your muscle groups where, I've always told trainers early on, especially for like a chest press with a guy, take whatever they're doing 10 reps at, throw 100 pounds on there, and they're probably going to still be in that same 6 to 8 rep range. That is not the same case with the legs. You can do something that you're getting 20 reps on, you throw an extra, 100 pounds on there, you might get 1. Right. So it's pretty interesting to me, and something I still haven't figured out of how to do appropriately. But over the years, I've definitely come to understand that a little more stimulus in that area is probably not a bad thing, because most human beings walking the planet right now are not physically capable of working their legs as hard as is probably recommended.
Right. I agree with that. Now, I still believe too in the idea of like, let's say you're 1 or 2 reps from absolute failure, improving on that same relative intensity each time. So if I'm always 2 reps from fail, because, mentally I can't get those last 2, or, the machine sucks, whatever it is, then the next time, as long as I add, a rep or a couple pounds to that same 2 reps from fail, right? Like as long as and I think people underestimate the power of that. They think it needs to be balls out failure, or they didn't achieve any stimulus. But as long as it's a relative improvement, right?
For sure. And I think the spectrum that you can see improvements in the legs is definitely a lot broader than a lot of other muscle groups too. It's just always funny to me again, just the amount of intensity that I think you can't like could possibly be achieved versus what is actually achieved. There's usually a pretty big chasm for most people. And as we both know, right? Like men are obviously the softest people on the world when it comes to training legs, right? So how many guys do you know that will shy away from, oh, this is uncomfortable, I gotta sit, women that will just crank out, leg extensions all day.
So go again, right?
Yeah.
But there's also a psychological component I found to that failure, right? If you give someone a number, they're gonna stop at that number.
Yeah.
And I've actually, as a trainer, refrained from saying, hey, I want you to beat 10 reps from last time, unless that person's maybe coming off a crazy shift, emotional, whatever it may be. Hey, give me just one more than you got last time. That's the goal. Most of the time, I'm coaching people that this is something you got to learn as a coach, able to read and respond to people. But I can usually tell based on the way like their bar speed or speed of motion is slowing down, got about 3 more. And on a leg press, it might be 4, right? So give me 4. And in my head, I already know that's 1 or 2 more than I got last time. So, I think as a coach, that's where like your value really comes in. If you can kind of give them that win and subconsciously they can then get there, then that's a successful set too, right?
Yeah, and every client's obviously different in how they respond to that stuff. And some people don't want to know at all, and other people have to know. They have to have a goal. Otherwise, I will stop at 2 because this is way too heavy. There's no way I can go.
Well, I find those people don't usually get the killer results because like that's where their mind's already at with a lot of things, right? Like I can train, but I can't eat right. I can't. Well, you'll probably be a little bit stuck.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's finish here with just some high level tips for people. I'd love to sort of get, maybe they can't afford to work with you for whatever reason, although I think your prices are very affordable. And if you're looking for an online coach, you should definitely reach out to Jack after this. But I think just in general, how can somebody get started, right? You've obviously worked on the mental side of the game for so long now too. If somebody's really blocked, they don't know what to do, they don't know where to start, maybe they can't commit. The idea of doing 5 days a week for an hour and a half is like, oh my god, there's no fucking way, this guy's crazy. Where can they get their foot in the door? Talk to me a little bit about that, and maybe how somebody can just really get started and start to make some positive changes.
The secret to doing that is to identify where you are at once again versus where you want to be. So you need to know where you want to be and where you are at right now on all of those major prongs: your physical training, your nutritional aspect, your sleep, and your stress or psychological well-being. Identify where you're at versus where you want to be, and find one single improvement, and even just one of each of those 4 prongs. So like, just, hey, I don't talk to myself very well. And before I can talk to myself better, I won't be able to get into the gym. So your goal right now is to do a self-talk app or whatever twice a week. Like very, very, there's a lot of low barrier entry ways to get the ball rolling. You just need to start that momentum, right? And I believe it's 2023. There's a solution or a way to do anything you want. So you need to just know where you're at versus where you want to go and find the next smallest step in that direction. And it can be one of the 4 prongs or something in each of them, whatever works for you. You do that until it becomes habit and second nature, and then you add another layer. And then from there, you'll be able to accelerate and reach your goals.
Yeah, I love that. And then, like you said, there's so many resources these days, right? So there's almost no excuse for not at least trying to get the ball rolling in some direction. Talk to us a little bit about your gym, what's coming with that, and then make a little pitch for people if they are interested in working with you. How can they contact you? Maybe some of your pricing structure if you want to give that away, or you can save that for if you do have a consult with someone. But talk to me a little bit about the gym. What's the status with that? What's going on? And then we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah, so the gym's come along nicely. We're waiting on a few final touches before we can officially announce that it's where it's going to be and when exactly we're going to open, but it's definitely on its way.
And this probably won't be out until early January too, just so you have an understanding of if that changes things as far as
Perfect. Yeah, no, so we're definitely looking early 2024 as a launch day here for the Jackedn'Leen gym. It's going to be a place where we bring this methodology to life. Every coach or trainer I have in there is going to believe in the integrative approach to exercise. Now, I don't want to create a bunch of robots. I want people to think for themselves, and I want to create a bit of a brain trust. So if you're also a trainer listening and you want to be a part of something like that, where we look at this integrative approach to exercise and health and well-being, absolutely reach out. But that's where the Jackedn'Leen is going to be. It's going to be a hub for that methodology, our 4-prong approach. And yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, is it going to be an open gym? Is it just going to be clients that you guys are working with, or can people just come in off the street and work out there? What is the feel, the vibe you're hoping to create there?
Yeah, so it's going to be a gym where anyone is welcome and everyone is welcome. I don't want to create a gym that people don't feel comfortable coming to. There's a lot of more hardcore gyms, which I personally have enjoyed being in, but the atmosphere wasn't conducive to any type of person walking in there. I believe, like I mentioned before, that any single person can elevate themselves. It's a mindset I want. So the gym itself will be looking for people and welcoming to people who just want to work hard and see improvements. We will have the highest quality equipment available. You know that's going to be the case. So you'll have the highest quality stuff, but it also won't be an environment where you feel threatened or like you can't accomplish what you came here to do, right? Not, we're also saying that not going to be a Planet Fitness. Like, it's going to be where you train hard, but ultimately it's a place for everybody that just wants to get better.
I love that. As far as equipment goes, are you unloading everything in the house? I know you've got some stuff in storage. Are you guys, is there anything you can talk about from an equipment perspective? Have you found some new stuff that you're bringing in? Talk to me just selfishly for like 30 seconds on that. And we can close this up.
We're going to have close to 100 pieces of equipment, not including racks and like bars and that stuff, like actual machines.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I want the top of the line everything. There are still pieces that have a long lead time that I'll be getting brand new, but a lot of the stuff is going to be some of the highest quality used stuff you've ever found. And like, you know, a lot of times some of the older stuff is the better stuff. You know, I have pieces as well that are 40 years old that I think kick the shit out of any machines nowadays. So we're going to have some really cool stuff coming, but we're going to have multiple chest presses, multiple leg presses. You know, you don't have to wait for anything. And if you want to have a machine that loads more at the top end of the range of motion or the bottom, or one where you can adjust it all on the machine itself, I'll have all three variations. So it's going to be it's going to be an exercise equipment junkie's paradise.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I'm super excited. I'm not usually excited to go back to Minnesota, but I'm definitely excited to come back and check that out once you guys get it open.
It'll be sunny.
Yeah. Will you still be doing your online coaching as part of that? Or are you going to try to shift exclusively to in-person if people do want to potentially work with you from other places?
Yeah, you know, I'll always be taking online clients in-person clients because I believe in constantly sharpening that saw. I think a lot of times these coaches move online and they lose what it's like to work with someone face to face. Now, ultimately, it is a time value for money thing, right? But I will love to work with people in my gym. I will have trainers that will handle a lot of like the in-person session stuff. I will always be coaching some people online, may not have the same volume I have now, but I'm always looking for like really dedicated, driven people that want to achieve that level of results, whether that be in-person training or online coaching. I'm happy to help both.
I love that. And Candace says you have to keep coaching her, so you better keep her on your client list. As far as people, if they're interested on reaching out, whether it's for coaching, maybe it's a trainer out there who's in the area who's thinking, hey, I want to work at a gym like this. It sounds awesome. How can people contact you? Where can they learn more about you guys? Give us a little plug and then we'll let you go.
So you can, follow me on Instagram, Jacked_fit, or Jacked at Jackedn'Leen, which is our kind of our coaching page, JACKEDNLEE Echo. And my wife's name is Eileen, and I didn't cover that in the intro, but Jack and Eileen, Jackedn'Leen. Now you might get it.
We'll put the link to that too. It's very creative.
Yeah, yep. And we have a YouTube page, and we're launching our website soon as well. And that will list all of our services, help you schedule discovery calls. We're going to be having our blog on there. I'm writing a massive library of ebooks that will be available as well. So it'll definitely be a good hub to get an idea of how we coach, and just if you want to learn more about exercise and nutrition and all that good stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll have a website launching here too, hopefully, if I can figure out how to use Squarespace. But I'm hoping to be able to put all this stuff up online in a centralized spot, as well as obviously Spotify, Apple, all that. So I'll put all your links that you sent me as well, so people can contact you. Jack, thank you so much for taking the time, man. This was super fun. We have like 10 other podcasts we have to get set up because I'd love to really dive into some of the nuance of some of this stuff. And I think it is super interesting. And I just love your take on things. And I think just in general, we as an industry just need to be more open to what else is out there and really understanding the value of what some of our colleagues offer, even if it doesn't fit right within the paradigm of what we're doing. Understanding what your limitations are and what you can actually offer your clients, and having other people in your circle that you could say, hey, you want to be a high level bodybuilder? I might not be the guy, but I know a guy, right? Or, hey, you only have an hour a week that you can commit to training. Hey, I'm going to send you over to Logan because he knows what to do. And the more we can build our circles like that, I think the better off we're all going to be, and spread this information and get rid of the bullshit, Jack.
Bullshit and the
Zip through the
dogma.
bullshit. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you everyone for listening. Please like and subscribe, and we'll try to get better at this going forward.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, man.